People think this is easy. So my name's Greg Howell. I'm the last speaker here today, and I tried to do a lot of reading in the community that's here about primarily in software and in that lean Kanban kind of way of thinking about it. And I did that because I've learned, having spent some time around the community, of some significant differences between how we look at lean in one world and another. And I wanted to try and figure out how to make that connection. And I've learned a lot about software, the designing and making of software since I've been here this year. So I wanted to look into this. I had come across a book, and I'm not quite sure how, called Power to the Edge. And it had an interesting name called Command and Control in the Information Age. And our industry, as I suppose the world right now, is undergoing a really significant shift with the development of the kind of computerized capability. Right now, most of that capability has been used around kind of to automate maybe what we already do. Lots of stuff focused on doing project drawings and things like that. But I began to think about the other possibilities of that, and the book Power to the Edge, Command and Control in the Information Age, was a book. It's a book available online. It's a PDF by Albers and another gentleman. And the book is about the idea of moving that the information age gives us the capability to allow people to self-synchronize and self-organize at the edge of battle. The military is famous for its command and control, and there's some good reasons for that. But the capability today of a very different kind of work where the decisions are made near the edge, the idea of power to the edge is at the edge of battle, began to resonate with me with the kinds of things I was seeing happening in the lean community. And so I've tried to dig into that and think about that for a while. This is a quote. One of the things I read was this book, The Cathedral, or paper, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, about thinking about how software was done. It's a great article to read that. I wonder if the man's name actually has 3 A's in it. I think maybe that's a typo. But I really like this line, right? It says, you know, the difference between acting on principle of command and discipline and acting on the principle of common understanding. This is from Kropotkin. This is a really old quote. The first works admirably in a military parade, but it is worth nothing where real life is concerned. And the aim can be achieved only through the, and I love this line, the severe effort of many converging wills. The idea of the number of people that come together with often very different opinions and understandings, and how they work together to create a different kind of future. And so that's the, I'm a little hesitant here to trip on these things. I did that once. So how'd this get over here? So here we are. And along the way, it led me to a kind of reinterpretation of lean construction, or perhaps lean in general. And so go to the next one here. The premise of the book is that the history of management has been primarily focused since the industrial age on what they call deconfliction, making sure that one activity doesn't conflict with another. The assembly line, the critical path schedule, those are tools that are great for deconfliction. And they proposed in the book that there was another function, which was synergy, and that we were moving from a time of the focus on deconfliction to synergy. And there's a great line in the book that says at one point they chose deconfliction over synergy. In other words, deconfliction was the focus of management. And so I want to try and talk about that and explore that with you a little bit. The book uses the Battle of Trafalgar, which is, I was in the, how many, is anybody else in the military? Anybody else been in the military? Few people, right? Do you guys know about the Battle of Trafalgar? In Great Britain, everybody knows about they like that a lot. Lord Nelson was the commanding officer there, and this is a famous painting by Turner of that battle. This thing doesn't allow me to see my notes quite as well as I'd wanted here. All right, and Admiral Nelson was overmatched. The other side had 33 ships to his. He had 27 or 26 or 27. He had chased the this was in 1805. It was during one of the Napoleonic Wars. Nelson has chased the Spanish and French fleets all the way across the Atlantic and back. His ships were lighter and smaller than the British ships, and so he was in some hazard for lots of reasons as they go into this battle. Some things you should know about battles in the sailing era, and that is that the wind matters. And the tradition, the most common way of having a fight would be there would be two fleets, and they would be going along essentially in parallel, and the wind would be blowing this way, so the ships would be canted over like that, because of the sails, right? So they'd be tipped over some, and you could elevate guns a little bit, but not much. And so the people that were upwind had the choice about when to start the fight, right? Because they could slide in, and so they might sail for days in parallel, trying to figure out when they're going to make the attack and feint a little bit and all that. But they'd sail along in kind of parallel paths. And the problem, the upwind people can start the fight, but the problem is these guys can choose when to end the fight, right? They can just choose to disengage by going off downwind. The other problem, though, is these guys can begin firing on these guys long before these guys get in range because their guns aren't able to be as high. So it's a really it's a scary business, huh? But the advantage of this, one of the reasons they like to sail across the wind, is so if you have a bunch of ships following behind you, they didn't have cell phones and radios and all that sort of thing, and so they could send their signal flags would be blown so you could read the flag, right? And so you could communicate back to your ships by hoisting a flag saying whatever it said, and so they could communicate relatively easily in that circumstance. And that's really important in a fight, that you can coordinate your action by the way you can communicate with one another. So Nelson is facing a daunting challenge, a very dangerous enemy, and he comes up with a radical idea. And the radical idea is this is a sort of picture of that battle. These are the French lines of ships going this way, and Nelson has this idea that he's going to go up and come. The wind is blowing this way, so the French are going that way. So Nelson decides to, instead of going along this way, he decides to basically go straight through their lines. Now, that was kind of a crazy idea because they're going to be exposed to the fire there pretty quickly. What am I doing wrong?
Nothing. I just want to make sure that everything's connected.
Oh.
It's okay.
All right. Okay. And so they're going to be these people are going to be subject to fire pretty quick. But the advantage of doing this is if we go through their lines, we can be firing right down their decks. There are relatively few guns on the ships that point out the front or the back because that's not the way they fight, and so they can do grievous damage in a hurry. Remember, his ships are lighter, they're faster. That also means they're more vulnerable. And so nobody had ever tried this, and so here's what Nelson does. He gathers the people together, and they talk about it. He brings his captains together, and they talk about it for quite a while, about the idea, and they have a conversation about how they're going to do it. These guys have been through a lot together. They trust each other. They are, you know, well, they've been in a lot of fights. They were particularly focused on the issues of communication and organization. How are we going to do this? I spoke about the wind thing. And they established a plan. And it was clear that Nelson had command intent, that is, or commander's intent at that time, what his intention was for the battle. And his final statement to his officers was, "No man can do very wrong who lays his ship alongside the enemy." All right? Very clear about that. And so they steam into this, but they know that when they're in that circumstance, that the authority and the ability to fight in this situation is not going to be commanded by Nelson anymore. It's going to be taken by each one of the ships fighting independently in a way that was really unusual, or basically hadn't been done. And so he had this self-synchronization and self-organization, and had power to the edge. Brought power right to the edge of the battle, so people there were making their decisions. They won. The French were beaten badly. Nelson, I think, loses one ship, and the others lose 16 or something like that. It's a terrible defeat. So there's Trafalgar Square. There's in London. There's all kinds of monuments to Nelson. And we see power to the edge today in the military in some places. That is where command and control of small self-organized units are taking action independently. Al-Qaeda is a perfect example. And on our side, we have things like the SEAL teams, those small units that are taking this action independently, self-synchronizing and self-organizing at the edge of battle. You listen to Will's story about on sites, thinking about how can we shift our organizations so that we can bring that power to the edge and people can be able to self-synchronize more effectively, particularly with the power of the communications capability we have now with the computer generated capabilities. And so Nelson, I think we could say, well, Nelson's line was to the extent that, well, I'll say it my way, probably we will be at our best as a community when we can bring power to the edge. That is, we can self-synchronize, we can organize at a distance out there, and people can do that on their own, and they can do that because of the widespread capability of the information that's available about the circumstance. The power of central authority is going to be less important. So here we go. So so let's go back and look at this a little bit. So this line, they prize deconfliction over synergy. This is a Henry Ford line, and you can see here that there are gasoline tanks coming down here that are being fed to the line, and so those inventories that you see here are inventories that separate one function from another. So there's no conflict between the people making gas tanks and the people installing them. The inventory allows them to run at slightly different speeds, and as long as they keep those inventories together, so the assembly line is a great tool for deconfliction. Now, one of the problems that can happen there is each one of these parties tries to optimize their performance at perhaps the expense of the larger initiative, and that might happen when you're just deconflicting, when you're in silos. Where synergy, we might begin to think more carefully about how we might accomplish more working together in different ways. Critical path schedule is another tool for deconfliction. It separates the activities, and our industry, the construction industry, has been riding on the back of the critical path schedule since the late 50s. It's about 50 years old now, something like that, 60 years old. It's getting old. I'm getting older. Since it came into the industry, and it's been the primary tool for project management. Now, there's some things though about. Let me go on here, just get a blank screen. The idea of power to the edge, though, has some interesting implications, and one of them reminds me very much of in the lean world, and that is that if you're going to have synergy, you have to, if you're going to put people in that position and you're going to have them talk together, they have to have the authority to decline. They have to have what Sidney Dekker would call a just culture, a culture where people have the autonomy to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And so to go back and about the severe engagement of wills, right, about when we're there facing that circumstance and how we can come together and find a way to work together at that edge, and simply following an order in command and control isn't going to get it. And so one of the things that's interesting about these small units in the military is that they have a lot of rank. Although they're quite small, they have a lot of authority within the military structure, which allows them to negotiate very directly about it. And these people are very, very careful about. If you want to meet some people that are careful, meet people that are going to go take a small unit off in this kind of in that kind of circumstance and get in a fight. So the idea that we could begin to bring that synergy in a construction project where we could begin to self-organize and synchronize out there at the edge is a pretty interesting idea to me, and it's a kind of thing that I think we're beginning to tinker with anyway. All right, let's see. In construction, I began to look at lean construction and whoops, I'm missing a slide. Boy, am I troubled.
I'm getting the same thing that's up there.
Talk among yourselves. Okay, so good, thank you. So I'd like to just look at an outline of the last planner system from this idea of deconfliction and synergy. And I was interested in it because we use a master schedule. We understand the importance of having a tool which fundamentally deconflicts the thing. We probably don't do it at the 25,000 activity level that we hear about on big projects, but we understand the need for a schedule that outlines the big chunks of the project. And then we move into synergy straight away. We bring together the supervision of the different trades, and they get together and they plan together how they're going to do the work. They talk among themselves, and they make requests and promises to one another about how they're going to do the work. We call it pull planning because of how we manage that planning session. Just leave that enough for there. And from that, we are able to list a look-ahead plan which identifies those things which we need if we're going to be successful. This is another tool for minimizing the conflict in our organization. And then we make a weekly work plan, and we see how well we are able to do that weekly work plan, and are we able to do what we said we're going to do at the beginning of the week, and then at the end of that time we measure our planning system's performance, and we can then determine which one of these functions was insufficient to help us get through the work. And so you see here a set of protocols that allows us to swing very clearly between the central authority and the distributive authority within the organization. And so I'm really beginning to try and think through then, how can we push this out now that we have this capability in our computers, computer communication, so that we can manage the information more effectively. What the people in Power to the Edge say, what Albers says, is that you need to have some things pretty clear. And some of these are a little difficult to understand. One of them is command intent. What are we trying to get done here? That's pretty clear in maybe, but how is that going to be broadcast out to the people? They need to be able to have that conversation about what they're going to do. Now, what Albers proposes is that the way we use information in traditional project management is we send him a memo, or we send him a memo, or we have a kind of central dispatch out there about what needs to be done. Albers is proposing that we move to a process of posting the information and letting people pull from the information that's available what they need to do the work. So it shifts the way information is going to be used, and I think that's different than we're using it right now. So here's the difference between a hierarchy, which is more in our tradition, and these edge organizations. This is from the book. So you see that in edge organizations, command is establishing the conditions, leadership is by competence, control is emergent, decision making is everyone's job, information is widely shared. Predominant information flows are horizontal, independent of the chain of command. Information management is post-pull. In traditional things, it's pushed. I tell you what you need to know when. The sources of the information are quite large. The organizational processes are dynamic, and individuals at the edge feel empowered. And what that means is they, in a way, as Decker would say, it's a just culture. It's a culture where people can say no. This is a Will Lichtig slide, and Will had put together some pictures of a traditional project organization in construction. This is what it looks like. We separate the architect, the owner, and the general contractor, and each of those has their own constituents in a traditional thing. And and he asked the cutting question, which was why on earth do we separate the people who know why from the people who know what from the people who know how? And when we do that, in what a project looks like is you see the common understanding of the project. This is over time. So they hire, the owner hires an architect, then they hires the engineers, then they hires the CMGC, and then finally they hire the major trades. And so the common understanding of what's going on builds up late. And what's happened in our industry in the last few years is the shape of that has begun to be changed as we have the rise of these integrated project agreements. And Digby Christian was here and speaking about that in his presentation earlier today. But what happens is we bring these parties together early, and then what happens is the common understanding builds up much sooner and gives us much greater opportunities to figure out how we're going to coordinate our action and work together. We might do more pre-assembly and so on. So I'm beginning to think more about the idea of lean and lean construction as this question of how do we deal with deconfliction and synergy. Let me get on here and see if I can find my notes. So let me just stop there. Any questions? Makes any sense? Any thoughts? One person at a time? Is this worth exploring?
Your perspective, what's universal about it?
Excuse me?
What's universal about it? The product world.
What's universal about the shift? I think that we always have had some ability to self-organize and self-coordinate. I think that's gone on a lot, but it hasn't been in a sense officially sanctioned. It is often not made explicit. The workers are not given the authority to say no, so they don't in a sense have the citizenship that they would in this circumstance. And so we are collaborative to some extent, but maybe not nearly as fully as we could be. And it would take a load off management off the management of the work if the teams could begin to self-organize and self-synchronize on their own. And the question then is, can we get command intent all the way there? And so there's some tools that I think help do that. We have a tool called Target Value Design, which is where we understand what the intent of the project is much more clearly. Make that sort of available down in the project is a way we could inform the people on the project more effectively. Does that make sense? Partial answer? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So do you see the practice of the kata that Will was describing here earlier in your previous session as really being key to developing this capability among, in fact, to me it strikes me, you're talking about basically developing a group of knowledge workers in construction to be able to respond to the changes that are happening on the floor and on the ground in real time.
Yeah, I think so, and it has some serious implications for the trade structure in our industry, right? Because we're going to have right now one of the ways in which we keep ourselves from self-synchronizing and self-organizing is the history of the discipline of the trades, and so maybe the lean construction we're using today is a kind of interim stage of that kind of development. That's not going to make a lot of people happy to hear me say that, but you've heard that in other presentations today about the effect of the social structures of this sets of these emerging sets of ideas. I'm not anti-union here, but I think we see some things, or even anti-trade. We see some things happening that are going to be problematic. She's going to show me I have 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Is that so?
There's a disintermediating action that could help this, and that's foremen today on projects like Will's, but other projects, particularly in the West Coast, are running around the site with tablets with not just a drawing that is for their work, but they've got the whole project available. And talk about power to the edge. We're not sharing, there's not much more to share.
Well, and when we were in Brazil last year, we went out at the IGLC meeting, we went out to this big development out there, and they had that's relatively, I'll say, primitive construction compared to what we do here, cast in place concrete, and then lots of masonry. Bricks are delivered to the project, and they have iPads on the forklifts. And the advantage when you're working with bricks in a building, you really want small batches to be delivered because you want them to be put down as close to where you're going to use them as you can, so you don't have to pick up the bricks and carry them a long way before you put them in the wall. And so what they had there were iPads. The foreman in the field had those iPads, and when they wanted a set of bricks, they didn't have to go to the office and requisition that. They sent a note to the forklift operator, and it came and it was delivered right where he wanted it. And so you began to see taking a load off the central mind as they were doing the work there. And that was in Fortaleza, Brazil. And so I think we're seeing that kind of thing is happening already. I guess I'd stop right there and say that. Oops. Well, that's a different slideshow than I was going to finish, but that's the one I had. So comments, questions, thoughts? Go ahead. Yes, sir.
I think when I hear about command and control, I think of centralized decisions or centralized authority. And then but the story about Trafalgar really, that doesn't match. The power of the edge seems much more what I would normally relate to. So can you help clarify that for me? Is my understanding of command and control just different, or?
Well, in the military, you really don't want my platoon to shoot at your platoon, right? And so you want to be able to have an authority that makes sure that the parties don't conflict with one another. And there's a tradition of high specialization and all of that, but the structure is of the kind of units that are separated. I think we already can see in the most recent misadventures that with the ability to communicate, there's a much greater sense of autonomy within the operating units out at the edge, right? And so this, but as you give autonomy, in a way, autonomy doesn't mean much if you can't, unless you can negotiate and decline. Does that make sense? And yes, sir. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say, in some ways, I think that the question of Trafalgar is, he didn't have command and control. He had command, but he had no control. And that's why he had to communicate command intent and let the power move to the edge, because he had no ability to control. And I guess I would say, Greg, one of the challenges is, I think in the information age, it can give the hierarchy more of a sense that they actually can control. That's what happened with CPM, is all of a sudden the power of the information made somebody think that they could actually control things out here where the work was being done, and it was a fantasy. And so I think that we actually have to avoid we have to downplay our own inclination to use the information to try to control. It's really counterintuitive. That's the way I've experienced it. I mean, Howell, you say people have the information available to them, and they still don't understand what that information means. It's like because they haven't participated in the development of the information, so they take it and then they have to interpret it, and there's not enough there for them to actually make an informed decision, and now they go produce something that isn't in alignment with commander's intent, because they never tried to figure out commander's intent because we gave them enough information that they assumed commander. So one of the things we're finding is that you have to simplify. You have to give that autonomy out, but if you overcomplicate it, it actually makes it worse. It actually has the potential to really make it worse. And the coordination, even on our big jobs that we see, we think the best way to coordinate is actually people communicating face-to-face and solving problems face-to-face, and so and not making assumptions. So it really becomes complicated.
So it's one of the ways that we got involved with the lean world was, particularly the Toyota world, was right down here when we were trying to learn how to make a good assignment. As Glenn Ballard used to say, if you want to make good assignments, you have to quit making bad assignments. Okay, and write that down. And the idea was that we wanted the foreman, the lead hand on the project, to decline to make an assignment unless they were confident that they had the wherewithal within their control. And so this is the idea that a foreman would say no is kind of crazy in the construction industry. But that was so if I have the authority to say no, so I don't make a defective assignment, That improves the quality of planning right there. It may not progress the job, but it puts it puts a finger on a problem in the system. And then if when I don't get something done, we go back and say, well, why didn't you get it done? And the answer was, I thought he was going to deliver the bricks he told me he was going to deliver the bricks by noon, and he didn't deliver them, and so I didn't get it done. So now we have a way to learn and improve our planning performance for next week. And so you already see a kind of autonomy. Just saying, the ability to say no is like a key to citizenship. And so the motto of I was in the Seabees, the motto in the Seabees is can do, right? You wouldn't say no. People didn't say no, and I used to joke that, but it isn't a joke, it's true, that I did a good job in the Seabees, and I did it because I got a citation for overcoming overwhelming supply shortages. How did I do that? I stole from the Air Force, right? Can do. And so when you say can do, when you don't have any obligation to say, when you're not allowed to say no, then you have to find some other way to carry out your mission, and you do that at the risk of larger failures because of the way you steal stuff from one another, right? The hierarchy was Air Force first, Army second, but not the Marines, because those are the guys we lived with. But so this thing here begins to strike me as we're beginning to do that right now. The information age, everybody's iPhone, all of that is giving us the ability to have tremendous more communication in the field, and I think it's opening the door to a level of synergy that we simply haven't had before. Sorry I can't be more clear and coherent about it, but it's sort of this groping in the dark stage right now about it.
Well, I think, Greg, I guess I would also offer you, John Reinertson spoke here last year, and some of this resonates in that chapter he wrote about Marine Corps.
Right.
And I think that one of the things we have to remember, it's not either or. It's when is one or the other appropriate. And so it doesn't mean that you're choosing which world to live in. You're just recognizing when is the moment to be towards one world and when's the moment to be towards the other.
Yeah. I have a good story about that, but I can't remember it. It's very interesting to be able to make those swings, though, back and forth, and to know when you are in this world, when you're in that collaborative world, and then when you switch back to that world of command and control kind of action, central coordination. I think we need more. We need a balance, and I think that balance is shifting more and more towards autonomy in the field, and it has some significant implications for us, and it's going to change how we deal with the IT world pretty dramatically. Thank you very much.